I'm an intersex straight man who was held captive by his stepbrother and used as his plaything. 3 months later, I got pregnant and made a desperate escape. I thought I'd never see him again. But then my son came down with a fever, and I ran right into my stepbrother, now a pediatrician. Running into David was the last thing I ever expected. My son's fever wouldn't break in the middle of the night, so I rushed him to the pediatric ER. The moment I stepped through the door, the attending physician looked up and met my gaze. I remembered it all, the hard lines of his brow and lips, the calm, deep eyes that struck terror deep into my soul. When he saw me, the tip of his pen paused for a fraction of a second. My blood ran cold. I could barely breathe. Then, just as quickly, he lowered his head and continued writing. Time seemed to stand still. I clutched my son tighter and turned to run. "Daddy, I don't feel good." My son's voice, weak and soft, snapped me back to reality. I instinctively pulled my mask up higher, as if it could offer another layer of protection. I prayed David hadn't recognized me. But I was wrong, of course. David finished the previous patient's chart, capped his pen, and finally looked up at me. His gaze swept over the sun in my arms before landing on my face. His eyes were piercing, analytical, as if he'd already discovered something. My son looks a little like him, but mostly like me. I felt the blood rush to my head, then drain away in an instant, leaving nothing but an icy chill. Did he recognize me? The thought made my knees go weak, and I almost dropped my son. "What's wrong with the child?" He spoke suddenly, his voice steady and indifferent, without a hint of emotion. A high fever and a cough. I tried my best to control myself, but my voice still trembled. David stood up and grabbed his stethoscope. He was even taller than I remembered, almost a full head taller than me now. He walked toward me, step by step, his shadow stretching and growing under the fluorescent lights. Finally, it swallowed me whole. That familiar, sterile scent of antiseptic washed over me, pressing in. Danger made me instinctively take a half step back, my spine nearly hitting the cold tiled wall. My obvious attempt to flee seemed to amuse him. He stared straight into my exposed eyes, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in the slightest hint of a smile. It was the look of a hunter watching its prey struggle in vain. My nails dug into my palms. I clenched my jaw under the mask and turned away, avoiding his gaze. He paid no mind to my retreat, professionally placing the stethoscope on my son's chest. As he leaned over, his wrist was just inches from my chin. The lingering scent of cedar from his skin drifted past my nose. A faint, steady fragrance. I was once obsessed with the sense of peace that scent gave me. Now it just made my stomach churn. The stethoscope was cold. My son, feeling uncomfortable, whimpered in my arms and flailed his little hands. "Don't move." David's voice was low, not harsh, but it carried a natural air of command. He reached out with his other hand, his fingers long and slender from years of piano, with well-defined knuckles, and easily wrapped them around my son's tiny, struggling wrist. The movement was practiced and precise, radiating absolute control. I watched my son's small arm pinned in his grasp, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed by a giant hand. Even breathing became difficult. Without looking up, he continued the examination. "Age? 2.5. I steadied my breathing, intentionally avoiding specifics. My heart was pounding. 2.5? He looked up, his eyes as cold as ice. "He seems a bit small for his age." My palms started to sweat, dampening my mask. After the exam, he straightened up and walked back to his desk. As he wiped his hands with an alcohol swab, he casually dropped a bombshell. "Where's the child's mother?" David smiled, a look full of meaning. "It's not often you see a father bringing his child in this late at night." My breath caught in my throat. I froze, overcome by a boundless sense of dread. Does he know? Is he testing me? Panic wrapped around my throat like a vine. I could hear my own ragged, heavy breathing under my mask. When I didn't answer, David sat back down and started typing. "The boy has acute pneumonia. I need to confirm any genetic history. Is there any family history of hereditary diseases on his mother's side?" His long fingers tapped rhythmically on the keyboard, each click striking a chord on my frayed nerves. I held my son's feverish body tighter and forced myself to sound calm. No, none. David paused and glanced up at me. Is that so? His tone was laced with cold amusement. I forced myself to nod. David said nothing more, just kept typing. Then, he calmly gathered the printed prescriptions and test orders and held them out to me. I reached out stiffly. Just as my fingertips were about to touch the papers, his hand pulled back half an inch. I grasped at empty air and looked up in shock, meeting his bottomless eyes. He stared at me, then slowly pressed the papers into my hand, which was still frozen in midair. Go handle the admission paperwork. David's gaze was fixed on my mask, so intense it felt like it could burn it to ash. His low, pleasant voice uttered 3 words that sent me plunging into an icy abyss. Mr. Quinn. He slowed his speech, enunciating each syllable as if he wanted to grind the fake name to dust between his teeth. I clutched the papers and practically fled the office with my son in my arms. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel David's eyes glued to my back. The hallway lights were a ghastly white. I walked fast, almost at a jog. It wasn't until I rounded a corner, completely out of his line of sight, that I dared to lean against the wall and gasp for air. My son whimpered again from the jerky movement, his face flushed red with fever. He recognized me. He must have figured it out. The realization coiled in my heart like a venomous snake, hissing a warning. I went through the admission process in a daze. I barely heard a word the nurse said. I just mechanically nodded, signed papers, and took my son to get his blood drawn. I didn't feel a shred of relief until I carried him into the hospital room. Thankfully, it wasn't a private room. There were 4 beds, and the 2 closest to the door were also occupied by children. My son was given the bed farthest in. After I settled him into the bed, a nurse came to start his 4. The cool medicine dripped from the bag, flowing through the tube and into his little body. He held onto my finger as he drifted off into a hazy sleep. I sat on the chair beside the bed, my eyes glued to the small glass window on the door. I was terrified that at any moment, that figure would appear. Time ticked by, each second an eternity of torture. The door to the room creaked open. I shot up straight, my back rigid like a startled rabbit. It was just a nurse coming to check his temperature. I sagged in relief, a cold sweat breaking out on my back. But the brief moment of calm was quickly shattered. About an hour later, the door opened again. David walked in alone, his white coat immaculate. Rounds. He was brief, skipping the 2 beds closest to the door and walking straight to my son's bedside. He picked up the medical chart. I swallowed nervously and pulled my mask up again. David's eyes scanned the temperature log, then moved to my face. The fever reducer is working. I gave a stiff nod. He suddenly leaned over and reached out to adjust my son's pillow. His arm passed right in front of my face, and that familiar cedar scent enveloped me again. I flinched back so violently that I knocked over my chair. The folding chair clattered to the floor, the sound piercingly loud in the quiet room. David froze, then slowly stood up and looked at me, his expression calm and assessing. "So jumpy?" he said, leaning closer. His voice was so low only I could hear. I was just adjusting his pillow so he could breathe more easily. My face was ashen, my lips trembling too much to speak. David stopped looking at me. His long fingers seemed to casually brush over my son's forehead before gently picking up a small card that had fallen beside the pillow. It was my son's pediatric insurance card, his name clearly printed on it. Andy Quinn. Andy Quinn. David murmured the name, his tone even but with a deliberate, playful edge. He looked up at me again, a curious smile playing on his lips. A fine name. He placed the card back by the pillow and turned to leave. The moment the door closed, I collapsed back into the chair, yanking off my mask to gasp for fresh air. In front of David, all my pretenses and fears were stripped bare. David is my stepbrother, technically speaking. He's also Andy's biological father. When I was 10, an accident took my parents. The Graysons adopted me, taking me in as their stepson. Only later did I realize they just wanted a playmate to keep their only son from getting bored. The Graysons were always away on business, leaving the huge mansion with just a housekeeper and David. My arrival shattered his solitude and ignited his rage. He didn't want me there. He thought I was stealing the parental love that should have been his. At first, it was just petty things, forcing me to do his homework, throwing away my backpack, spreading rumors at school that I was trying to steal his family's fortune, which led to me being targeted by the other rich kids. As a child living under someone else's roof, I silently endured his nonsense. But my compliance only fueled his arrogance. At his 20th birthday party, he gave me a red collar. As I stared in shock, he held it up to my neck. His voice was excited. "Good boy. Put it on." "David." My voice trembled. "Don't do this, HM?" He leaned close to my ear, his tone intimate yet cold. "Have you forgotten your last lesson, brother? Or would you rather show everyone your freakish body?" I froze, glancing down at the party guests below. Ever since he discovered I was intersex, he had kept me locked away in this mansion, toying with me as he pleased. I closed my eyes in despair and let him fasten the collar around my neck. His voice was thick with unconcealed excitement. "That's my good boy." I numbly complied. "Yes, master." He hooked a finger through the collar and suddenly yanked me toward him. "Remember, everything you have, the Graysons gave you," he whispered. "And that includes you. You're mine." David's words were like a devil's whisper. I woke up with a start. The night was deep, and the hospital room was eerily quiet. The fluid dripped, one drop at a time, like a countdown timer. By the dim glow of the night light, I stared at my son's sleeping face. His thick eyelashes fluttered in his sleep. His features looked more and more like that man's. Especially tonight, when David had leaned over to examine him, their two faces almost overlapping in the light. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I couldn't stay here any longer. For years, I'd lived under a new name, hiding and running. But the mark of his blood was becoming clearer as my son grew. The way David had scrutinized Andy tonight, it was obvious his suspicions were aroused. He was so sharp, so smart, it was only a matter of time before he figured out Andy was his son. Once David knew this was his own flesh and blood, a shiver ran down my spine as I remembered what he said the day he put that collar on me. If he found out about the child, he would stop at nothing to take him away. I have to take my son and run. Right now. The sky outside was just beginning to lighten. The urge to leave grew like a wildfire in my mind. With trembling hands, I opened an app and booked the earliest train ticket to Phoenix. Phoenix was warm and pleasant year-round, a good place for Andy to recover. More importantly, it was far enough away. The bag was empty. A nurse came and removed the needle. As I packed our things, the bottle of Andy's fever reducer slipped through my fingers. I bent down to pick it up and saw my own pale, terrified reflection in the glass cabinet door. Just like the boy who had put on the collar 10 years ago. No, I won't let David take Andy from me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Dawn was breaking. I gently shook my sleeping son awake, covering his mouth before he could speak. "Andy, Daddy's gonna take you to see the ocean." I picked him up and was about to leave the room. I had just reached the door when it was pulled open from the outside. David stood before me, having traded his white coat for a black overcoat. A chill radiated from him. In his hand, he held a manila folder. I instinctively tightened my grip on my son and took several steps back into the room. David's gaze fell first on Andy's face, then slowly moved to mine as he walked toward me, one step at a time. His tall frame completely overshadowed me, the suffocating pressure closing in. I pulled my mask up to cover most of my face and held Andy protectively, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw the bold letters on the document peeking out of his folder. Paternity test report. I woke with a jolt, my chest heaving. A cold sweat had soaked through the back of my shirt. The early morning hospital room was dead silent. Andy was still sleeping soundly, the dripping into his arm. Drop by drop, just like the countdown in my dream. With a trembling hand, I tucked him in, my fingertips brushing against his warm skin. His features, so similar to David's, made my heart clench. Bad dream? David's low, raspy voice cut through the silence without warning. A chill shot up my spine. I sat bolt upright. David was sitting across from me, I don't know for how long. His legs were crossed, a patient file resting on his lap. His face was lost in the shadows, his expression unreadable. His voice was tired. What did you dream about? I scrambled to my feet, knocking the four-stand. It swayed violently, and a wave of dizziness washed over me like a black tide. I hadn't slept for days, looking after Andy while he battled the fever. My body was exhausted. Running into David had pushed my mind to its breaking point. My temples throbbed, and a sharp ringing filled my ears. In my vision, David's figure began to sway. The moment I opened my mouth, my knees gave out. The entire room spun and tilted, the ceiling lights blurring into a painful halo. I saw David rushing toward me. Before everything went dark, I felt a pair of strong arms catch my falling body. Leo. For once, David's voice was frantic. I was pressed against his chest. The blended scent of cedar and antiseptic on his white coat enveloped me. Through the fabric, I could feel the erratic tremor in his chest and hear the frantic, thunderous beating of his heart. So he could get nervous? He could feel anxious? I wanted to laugh, but I didn't have the strength. In the blur, I saw the tattoo on his collarbone, a bite mark. The scar I left 3 years ago when I fought back. When I woke up again, I was in a hospital bed with a nutrient 4 in my hand. Morning light streamed through the blinds, casting stripes across my face. I was disoriented for a moment, then turned my head and saw David sitting beside me. His hands were clasped in front of him. His white coat was a mess of wrinkles, his face etched with fatigue. He was resting with his eyes closed. My body felt too heavy to move. I scanned the room and saw Andy sleeping peacefully in the adjacent bed. A wave of relief washed over me. You're awake. David raised a hand to pinch the bridge of his nose. His voice was tired and hoarse. I looked at him and he looked at me. Suddenly, he leaned toward me. I had nowhere to go, shrinking back under the covers. His warm, dry palm pressed against my forehead. Fever's gone. He pulled back just as quickly, his usual cold demeanor returning. You didn't know you were running a fever? The accusation was clear. I pretended not to hear, turning my head away from him. Maybe it was because I was sick, or maybe I had just given up. There was no point in hiding anymore. The fear of seeing him again had strangely faded. We sat in a standoff, neither of us speaking. The atmosphere became tense and strange. It wasn't until a nurse came in to change my 4 bag that I heard David let out a deep sigh. It sounded like a mix of exhaustion and resignation. Brother. That word snapped me back to reality. I hated when he called me that. Rage flooded my heart, replacing the terror of the night before. I summoned all my strength, grabbed the nurse's metal tray, and threw it at him. David didn't flinch. The tray hit him square in the face before clattering to the ground with a loud bang. Blood immediately welled up, trickling down his forehead. It ran past his eye, down his cheek, and dripped from his chin onto his white coat. A small, jarring splash of red bloomed on the fabric. Dr. Grayson, the nurse cried out, about to rush forward to treat his wound. David waved her off, gesturing for her to leave. She hesitated, glanced at me, and finally backed out of the room. The room was silent again. I was breathing heavily. The needle in the back of my hand had backed up with blood, a dull, throbbing pain. David didn't say a word. He just knelt down and slowly began to pick up the tray. Blood dripped onto the floor, but he seemed not to feel any pain, methodically gathering the scattered items. He was always like this, always hiding his madness behind a mask of calm, always in control. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white, my nails digging into my palms and drawing blood. David slowly stood up, put the items back on the tray, and placed it on the cabinet. He looked at me through the streaks of blood, his expression chillingly serene. Feel better now? My sanity finally snapped. I grabbed a glass of water and hurled it at him. It shattered at his feet, spraying water and glass everywhere. Why? Why do you always do this to me? Years of suppressed grief and anger burst out of me. You locked me up like a dog, and now you stand there acting like we're brothers. Are you happy now, seeing me like this? Is this what you wanted? He just gave me a detached glance. Are you done? David ignored my pain. He took a step forward, his leather shoes crunching on the broken glass, making a sound that set my teeth on edge. Then it's my turn. David stood over me, his shadow swallowing me in my helpless rage. He watched me calmly. First, I locked you up because you were trying to kill yourself. My breath hitched. Second, David paused, then leaned down close, his breath on my face mixed with the sharp smell of blood. A smile that was almost gentle appeared on his blood-streaked face. Did you really think you could have faked your death and escaped so easily without my permission? My heart lurched. And third, he reached out and stroked my cheek, his expression almost cruelly tender. Daddy? A soft, sleepy voice cut David off. My son rubbed his eyes and looked at us. When he saw David's bloody forehead, his little face went pale. Almost instinctively, David turned his body to the side and quickly grabbed a piece of gauze to cover the wound. He forced a stiff but gentle smile for Andy. Uncle bumped his head by accident. It was a subconscious, protective gesture. My rage froze in my chest. I couldn't let it out and I couldn't swallow it down. It made me sick. David once said he loved me. He said it while he had me chained to the bed like a dog, his hands stroking the body I hated most. Brother, no one can ever separate us. Not even death. He said those words as he forced himself on me. My violent struggles turned into desperate pleas until I finally bit down on his collarbone, my sobs breaking into whimpers. He was completely unhinged, treating me as his possession, trampling on my dignity. In that huge mansion, my world was reduced to a single bedroom. The room was covered in soft carpets, and every corner I could reach was fitted with protective padding. Even the utensils were made of silicone. David wouldn't let me die, but he erased my existence. Under his control, I experienced a complete social death. No one knew he had me imprisoned. No one sensed my despair. Day after day, I languished in that mansion. The seasons changed. I was locked up for a long time. I can't remember how long. David tormented me daily, and in the pain and loneliness, I lost myself. He, in turn, became the only thing I could depend on. I was drowning in the web he wove for me. It wasn't until I felt a strange stirring in my belly that I finally woke up. I had to escape. The idea took root, and I began to plan, satisfying his every demand each day. My compliance pleased him. He let his guard down. I set the room on fire. The fire destroyed the mansion. It also destroyed every trace of me. I survived, carrying the child in my womb. I thought about not keeping him. But my body is unique. If I had tried to terminate the pregnancy, it would have killed me too. I hated Andy's existence. He was a product of David's torture, a symbol of my shame. But when he came into the world with a loud cry, his tiny face red and wrinkled, his small hand unintentionally grasping mine, a strange feeling struck a soft spot in my heart. Having lost my parents so young, I had an almost desperate craving for family. And here he was, the only person in the world I shared a bloodline with. I looked at him and he gradually quieted down. As our eyes met, I realized my own face was wet with tears. The first thing Andy did when he woke up was look for me. I must have looked a wreck, because his expression changed the moment he saw me, and he shot David a fierce glare. Andy's voice was small but firm. "Don't you bully my daddy." He jumped off the bed, barefoot, right onto the broken glass. David and I both reached for him at the same time. Andy is my flesh and blood, the child I raised and protected. David was no match for a father's protective instincts and speed. The 4-needle ripped from my vein, sending a spray of blood arcing through the air. I didn't feel the pain. I caught Andy's small body, pulling him into a tight hug, my heart still racing. Blood dripped from my fingertips onto the glass shards on the floor, blooming like little red flowers. The composure on David's face finally cracked. He rushed forward and grabbed my wrist, his thumb pressing hard on the bleeding puncture wound. He was unusually tense, his breathing ragged. "Don't move." With his other hand, David fumbled for the call button, his movements almost frantic. Seeing my blood, Andy struggled out of my arms and started pounding his little fists on David's shoulder. "Don't bully my daddy. You're a bad man." David's body went rigid. He looked at Andy, whose features were a mirror image of his own, then at our clasped hands. I wrenched my hand free and pulled Andy back into my arms. My voice was cold. "Get out." A complex emotion flickered in David's eyes. He slowly lowered his hand, which was still frozen in midair. "Leo Quinn," he said, using my fake name. "He's my son." David looked me straight in the eye, his voice firm. "Isn't he?" I hugged Andy so tightly I felt like I might crush him. Unease was taking over my heart. I can't let him take Andy. Andy is all I have now. The room echoed with Andy's cries, but all I could hear was a sharp ringing in my ears. "Leo, let go." David rushed over to pull my arms apart. His voice uncharacteristically panicked. "Brother, you're suffocating him." I snapped back to reality. Andy was struggling to breathe, nearly passing out in my arms. David seized the opportunity, pulling my son away from me. He propped him up on his shoulder and gently patted his back. At that moment, nurses flooded into the room. David backed away with Andy. I tried to go to them, but two nurses held me down on the bed. "Give him a sedative." The panic deepened. I thrashed on the bed like a fish out of water, the smell of antiseptic and tears filling my throat. "No, don't. Give me back my son." The needle pierced my skin. I stared at Andy's tear-streaked face. He tried to look at me. "Daddy." David turned, blocking Andy's view. He gently covered his head with his hand, patting him softly. His voice was a soothing whisper. "It's okay. It'll be over soon." The drug washed over my limbs like a tide, and my vision began to blur. The last thing I saw was David kneeling down with Andy. My son's face peeked over his shoulder, his expression worried as he reached for me. I slept for a very long time. I dreamed of my parents and a younger me on the way home. The car spun out of control, and they lifted me out of the vehicle. Flames engulfed the car, and then the flames engulfed the mansion that had been my prison. My younger self was lying on the ground. My present self was standing at the mansion's entrance, having escaped David's grasp. The fire was merciless, consuming everything. The scene shifted. David was holding Andy's hand. They were walking away from me, laughing and talking. I ran after them, but I could never catch up. I heard a murmur of voices around me. "His condition looks like post-traumatic stress disorder." I woke up. The white ceiling made me dizzy. Andy was lying beside me, his little face stained with tears. I reached out and stroked his soft cheek. Perhaps because of the sedative, a strange calm settled over me. David was talking to another doctor. Noticing I was awake, he gave the doctor a nod, and the other man left the room. "Severe malnutrition. Is this how you've been living all these years?" David's tone was as sarcastic as ever. I held Andy close. He nuzzled under my chin, finding a comfortable spot to rest. The sunlight outside was bright, almost blinding. I was silent for a long time. Then, my chapped lips moved, and I spoke one clear sentence. "Just let me go. I was tired. I don't care about the past, and I don't want to see you in my future." David didn't reply. I didn't look at him. I didn't care what he looked like now. Time seemed to stop. An eerie silence filled the air. After what felt like an eternity, I closed my eyes and heard David's barely audible reply. "Okay." From that day on, David really did disappear. Andy's pneumonia hadn't cleared up, but his attending physician was someone else now. Andy and I were moved to a VIP room. The doctors wouldn't discharge us, so for Andy's health, I agreed to stay. But I couldn't afford a VIP room. When I tried to negotiate a transfer with the doctor, I was told the bill had already been paid, and that our meals for the week had been pre-ordered. When the food arrived, I felt a little dazed. It was all my favorite dishes. For a whole week, I didn't see David once at the hospital. It was as if our reunion had been nothing more than a bad dream. He had completely vanished from my world. 7 days later, Andy had recovered, and I took him back to our tiny apartment. It was in a small, remote town, miles away from the Graysons' world. I never imagined I'd run into David just by taking my son to the doctor. After I escaped the mansion, I spent some time living in a basement, working several jobs a day to save money. It wasn't until Andy was born that I fled here, renting this top-floor single room for $400 a month. It was still terrible, but it was much better than a damp basement. When I pushed open the door, the smell of stale air and dust hit me. Leftover instant noodles were molding in a corner, the faucet was dripping, and rotting vegetables spilled out of the trash can. The sound of our neighbors arguing, mixed with a child's crying, came through the thin walls. This tenement building was packed with people, mostly drifters and odd jobbers. It wasn't very safe. As I stepped inside, dust swirled up from the floor, making Andy cough. I opened the only window to air the place out. The clatter of mahjong tiles and the smell of cooking fumes from downstairs immediately flooded in. Andy coughed even harder, his small body curled up by the bed, hacking until he was breathless. I quickly patted his back to help him catch his breath, then had him wait in the tiny bathroom, the only space he could stand in. After cleaning up the apartment, I made 2 bowls of noodles and took Andy up to the roof to eat. Andy held his little bowl, sitting on a stool and swinging his legs, his face beaming with happiness. "This is so good, Daddy. I love you so much." He was so easy to please. After eating well at the hospital, he was just as happy with a bowl of plain noodle soup. Nothing like David at all. I froze for a second, wondering why I was even thinking about David. Andy tilted his head and looked at me, then leaned his body against mine. As his father, I knew he was asking for affection. "Daddy, why is the doctor uncle gone?" He hugged my arm, his voice sweet and childlike. The handsome Dr. Uncle. He started talking late, so his words weren't always precise. But I knew what he meant. He was asking why he hadn't seen David. "Daddy, don't you like him?" A child's innocence hit me right where it hurt. I didn't know how to answer. I had cared for David, depended on him, and hated him. After my parents died, the Graysons took me in but paid me no mind. David, my stepbrother, became the only brother I had. As his older brother, I tried to be responsible for him. Seeing I was quiet, Andy buried his head in my chest and nuzzled me. "Daddy, don't be mad. Andy won't ask anymore." "Daddy's not mad." I stood up, holding Andy. He cooperatively held both our bowls. I pushed open the heavy iron door with one hand, hoisted him up a little higher, and went back down to our apartment. The door to the apartment across the hall was open, a suitcase sitting by the entrance. A new neighbor had moved in. People came and went all the time here. I glanced across the hall. It was a 1-bedroom, much bigger than my place. There were 2 cardboard boxes in the entryway and 2 cigarette butts on the floor by the door. I frowned and closed our door. Andy's pneumonia had just cleared up. I needed to keep him away from cigarette smoke. Only later did I find out. The person across the hall was David, and he never smoked. I went to work as usual, leaving Andy at home. He was only 2 years old, and I hated leaving him alone. But I couldn't bring a child to my job, so I had to ask my landlady to check in on him and install a security camera. Thankfully, Andy was a good kid. He would watch me leave every morning and wait for me to come home every night. He was so well behaved it broke my heart. I didn't know what kind of person my new neighbor was. I tried knocking on his door to say hello once, but he didn't answer. When I got home from work, Andy threw himself into my arms. "Daddy, the big brother made me dinner." "What big brother?" Confused, I took out my phone to check the camera footage. Andy sat on my lap, opening a picture book. "Can I play with the big brother tomorrow?" I furrowed my brow. "What big brother?" He pointed toward the door. I knew he meant the apartment across the hall. He said since Daddy isn't home, he can play with me. On the camera footage, the landlady was greeting the man from across the hall. He had his back to the camera, so I couldn't see his face. Andy was sitting on a little stool by our door, munching on an apple the landlady had given him, watching them chat. Suddenly, the neighbor went back inside. A moment later, he came out again and handed the landlady a bowl of something. I turned off the video and looked at the bowl on our table. Daddy? Andy tilted his head, a puzzled look on his face. I picked up the bowl, opened our door, and went across the hall. I raised my hand and knocked. No answer. Andy hugged my leg from behind and peeked out at me. The big brother went out. Still confused, I went back to our apartment. I messaged the landlady on WhatsApp. I asked her who the new neighbor was. After all, this place was full of sketchy people. What if he was a danger to Andy? I couldn't find another place this cheap on such short notice. The landlady replied, "He's a distant relative of mine." I breathed a sigh of relief. If the landlady knew him, it should be fine. Then she added, "I'm going out of town for a few days, so I asked him to help keep an eye on your boy." I never actually saw my neighbor. Every morning when I left for work, there would be a freshly cooked breakfast sitting outside my door. At first, I wanted to thank him, but he always avoided me. When I got home at night, there would be a hot meal waiting. On top was a small note, "Made too much," short and to the point. Over time, I realized he meant no harm. Andy also became much more cheerful and lively. Before, when I left him alone, he was a bit timid and didn't talk much. Now, he would greet me at the door when I got home and had become much more affectionate. And thanks to the meals he kept bringing, I had put on some weight. Looking in the mirror, my face was healthier, fuller than before. I need to find a way to thank him, I thought. I can't just keep taking free food. But he never opened his door and ignored my greetings. So I started leaving things for him. Sometimes it was homemade steamed buns, sometimes one of my specialty dishes. He would always wash the bowl or plate and leave it outside my door. Slowly, we developed a strange, silent routine. On weekdays, he made me meals and watched Andy while I was at work. On my days off, I would make him food and collect the clean dishes from him in the evening. After 6 months of this, I started looking into daycares. Andy was getting older. I couldn't just leave him at home alone anymore. He needed to be around kids his own age. One weekday, I woke up early to take Andy to visit a daycare center. The door creaked open, startling the man in front of it. He was bent over, about to place breakfast on the little stool by my door. When he heard the door open, his tall frame flinched, and he froze. I was stunned, not expecting to finally meet him so suddenly. Andy called out sweetly, "Good morning, big brother." "Hello?" I said with a smile. It was the first time I had ever spoken to my next-door neighbor. He remained stiff, not standing up, awkwardly trying to hide his face. Curious, I leaned down and caught a glimpse of a familiar face. My own expression instantly turned to ice. "What are you doing here?" Seeing David again, I was surprisingly calm, without the panic of our first reunion. I turned my head, trying not to pay him too much attention. David placed the breakfast down, then stood up, keeping his side to me, his face looking slightly embarrassed. I pulled Andy behind me and waited for an answer. He just moved his lips, but no words came out. Then he turned and went back to his apartment. The dull thud of the iron door closing separated us. I suddenly felt like a deflated balloon, my whole body going limp. I didn't want to think about why he was here. He had promised not to appear in front of me again. If he wanted Andy, he could have taken him at any point in the last 6 months. Every second he spent in a filthy place like this must have been torture for him. A few days later, I received a package. I tore it open. Inside were several legal documents. One was a Grayson family inheritance agreement, including a stock transfer certificate. My adoptive parents had passed away, and 20% of their assets were to be inherited by me. Another was a property transfer agreement. David was transferring all of his personal assets to Andy. And finally, there was a custody agreement for Andy. David was voluntarily relinquishing all his parental rights. I threw open my door and ran to his apartment, pounding on the iron door until my hand was red. The landlady poked her head out from the stairway. "He moved out a couple of days ago. That young man is a strange one. He insisted I tell you he was my distant relative. Said he was sorry and that he couldn't face you." The landlady's face was full of gossip. "Leo, what's the story with you two? He seems so worried about you." I just stood there, suddenly feeling lost. Not long after, I moved out of that apartment with Andy. I didn't touch any of the Grayson family assets. A sum of money for child support appeared in my bank account. I transferred it to a separate account and used my own earnings to rent an apartment in a much nicer neighborhood. It was pouring rain the day we moved. The movers helped me get everything in place, and then I took Andy to explore our new home. Andy was thrilled with the new apartment, cupping my face in his hands and covering me with kisses. That night, after I put Andy to bed and tucked him in, I went back to my own room. We had a lot of stuff from the move. I found the inheritance papers and locked them in the safe in my nightstand. As I got up to close the curtains, a familiar figure in the corner of my eye caught my attention. David was standing in the rain below, his silhouette stretched long by the streetlights. He was looking up at my window like an abandoned puppy. Our eyes met. His gaze was complex. There was remorse, pleading, and an undisguised love. My breathing hitched. I yanked the curtains shut. The heavy fabric blocked out the sound of the rain and everything else outside. I cleared my mind, lay down on the bed, and closed my eyes. I can't forgive David. Some wounds never heal. David is the biggest scar of my life, one that can never be removed. Extra. Love cannot erase suffering, nor is it a cage. My stepbrother is intersex. He hated his body. I, on the other hand, saw it as a gift meant for me. I first met my stepbrother when I was 10. His eyes were red and swollen. He had clearly been crying. My mother led him into the house and introduced him to me. I looked him over, my gaze far from polite. He gave me a forced smile and, trying to act like a grown-up, held out his hand.
David,
You're hideous. I frowned and slapped his hand away, rejecting his gesture. His face went pale. I'm sorry. We don't spend enough time with David. He's a bit of a loner. My mother's words were a criticism, but her tone was protective. He clenched the hem of his shirt, swallowed his hurt, and forced another smile for my mother and me. It was uglier than his crying. My stepbrother was a great student. My father was always praising him. I was annoyed by it, but his handwriting was beautiful, so I'd snatch his homework to secretly practice my own. Admiration and dislike aren't mutually exclusive. I told myself that as I collected his old tests. Later, some people called him a jinx, said he'd killed his own parents and now he was here to steal my family's fortune. He never denied it and I didn't care. It's not like my parents loved me anyway. It wasn't until I noticed he always had bruises that I realized someone was bullying him in my name. He was too weak to fight back. I was furious at his cowardice. I took care of those guys and warned them off. But he thought I was the one who put them up to it. I didn't bother explaining. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. Adolescence hit. I discovered his secret. His body wasn't like mine. He was intersex. The discovery was a huge shock. The way I looked at him began to change. My stepbrother was tall and lean with pale skin that never seemed to tan, even during military training camp. He had a small face and delicate features. He had a clean, quiet, and modest air about him. Not like the rest of us at that age, arrogant and full of ourselves. The girls loved him, they were always flocking around him. A vicious thought crossed my mind. If those girls knew about his body, would they still like him? I even started having nightmares. Every night, he would be lying beneath me, reaching for me, gently accepting me. I would wake with a start every time, the bed a complete mess. I felt guilty, disgusted with myself. My stepbrother helped me with my homework, but I was always distracted. Under the lamp, the contour of his face was soft. A few stray strands of hair fell across his brow, making the white collar of his school uniform seem even brighter. As the tips of his hair brushed past his eyes, I saw that his focus was pure, his gaze clear as water. My pen stopped, scratching a line across the paper. He turned to look at me, his voice gentle. Tired of studying? My heartbeat was so loud it made me panic. A wave of irrational anger surged through me. I crumpled the paper and roared, "Get out!" He was startled, a flicker of shock in his eyes. I couldn't look at him. The unfamiliar, shameful love in my chest was agonizing. Get out. Terrified he would discover my filthy thoughts, I grabbed the crumpled paper and threw it at him. Somehow, a pencil was caught inside the paper ball. It hit him on the brow bone, cutting him. Blood instantly seeped out. He sucked in a sharp breath of pain, raised a hand to touch it, and froze. My anger vanished, my mind went blank. He stood up, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry. It was my fault." From that day on, my feelings changed. I had fallen in love with my stepbrother, another man. I avoided him all the way until high school graduation. At the graduation ceremony, he gave a speech as the valedictorian. I sat in the audience, my eyes following his every move. The more brilliant he was, the more I felt like a rat in the gutter, only daring to covet a light that wasn't mine from the darkest corners. After the ceremony, a girl asked him out. I knew her. She was a good person, a good match for him. People started teasing them with the typical teenage banter. He looked torn, maybe a little shy. All their laughter felt like needles pricking my fragile nerves. The last thread of my sanity finally snapped. I couldn't stop myself. I walked over and dragged him away. "David, I didn't say yes to her," he explained. "If you like her." His straight guy innocence was so infuriating. That irrational anger flared up again. I shoved him away, trying to hold back my rage. "I don't like her." He pressed his lips together, looked down and said again, "I'm sorry. I misunderstood." Sorry. I slammed my fist into a nearby tree trunk. "Is that all you know how to say?" His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. The frustration and jealousy grew stronger. I nearly ground my teeth to dust before I finally managed to spit out the words, "Get out of my house, and don't ever let me see you again." In college, my stepbrother and I were in different cities. I secretly went to see him almost every week. He never knew. At the time, I also didn't know he was enduring a kind of bullying I couldn't have imagined. Someone had hidden micro cameras in his school's bathrooms and locker rooms, secretly filming and live streaming. My stepbrother's body was exposed for all to see. His photos and videos spread all over the forums. Then, a tidal wave of malice crashed down on him. He was doxxed, became the subject of vile sexual rumors, and was stared at with disgust. The next time we met face to face was at the police station near his university. His roommate had drugged him and tried to assault him. He fought back and cracked the roommate's skull. I was glad. His resistance pleased me. After giving his statement, I paid his bail and took him out. The online harassment, while vicious, hadn't caused physical harm. The roommate's assault was attempted, not completed, so it wasn't a chargeable offense. But he had put his roommate in the hospital, which constituted assault. He was going to be temporarily detained and await charges. It was such bullshit. I cursed them out and called my lawyer. He was silent the whole way. Then, without warning, he bolted into traffic. I was still on the phone with the lawyer. I reached out, but I couldn't catch him. He ran straight into a small truck. The sound of the impact was a dull thud. The tires screeched against the pavement in an emergency brake. His body flew into the air like a piece of garbage tossed aside, tracing a bizarre arc. The crowds faded away. All I could hear was a ringing in my ears. His body hit the ground. My vision went red. The world seemed to stop. "Brother." I waited outside the operating room for a day and a night. Thankfully, they saved him. Unfortunately, he had severe depression and PTSD, and he was convinced I was behind all his misfortunes. The doctor said he might never recover. I thought about it and I accepted it. He had faced too much malice, too much pain. It was better if I was the only villain in his story. I had people scrub the internet and had my lawyers sue everyone involved. He looked at me with pure terror. I wanted to explain, but I didn't. My filthy love was not something I could ever show him anyway. I thought my stepbrother and I could just continue on, coexisting peacefully, until my parents got divorced. They had secretly remarried and started new families back when I was a sophomore in high school. I was the last to know. My stepbrother had known earlier. He and my parents had hidden it from me. They lied to me for 3 whole years. The immense shock and sense of betrayal hit me hard. I couldn't understand why my stepbrother would betray me. The feelings I had suppressed, the ones I could never speak of, began to twist into something extreme. When my stepbrother looked at me with that familiar fear in his eyes, the violent desire inside me reached its peak. I blamed him for everything. If he hadn't come to my house, I wouldn't have fallen for him, and I wouldn't be in this agony. If he hadn't betrayed me by hiding my parents' divorce, I wouldn't be in this mess. My unrequited love for him morphed into a towering hatred. I didn't understand why he didn't love me. He was so kind to everyone else. But with me, he was only ever afraid and disgusted. I admit I was a monster. I took all my resentment out on him. At my birthday party, I gave him a collar and put it on him as he stared at me in despair. I pulled him close and whispered in his ear, "You're mine." I only had him and he only had me. What happened at school had traumatized him, and my actions pushed him over the edge. He tried everything to die, overdosing, drowning, jumping. I had no choice but to use force. I cut him off completely from the outside world. In that lonely mansion, I tied him to the bed. To me, he was fragile and beautiful. I hated him. I hated him for not loving me, for betraying me. He begged me for mercy, but I knew that if I untied him, he would jump from the nearest window. I watched over him day and night, fed him by hand, bathed him. As we became more intimate, the desires I had suppressed were reawakened. He kept trying to kill himself in front of me, and one day I snapped and did something terrible. He fought back violently, then begged desperately, until his cries dissolved into broken sobs. A sharp pain shot through my collarbone, and blood seeped from the wound. But the blood only made me more excited. I wasn't dreaming. He was finally truly mine. When I came to my senses, I was filled with regret. But there's no turning back time. What was done, and I was trapped again. He started planning his escape, becoming completely submissive to me. My guilt was unspeakable, so I went along with whatever he wanted. He set the mansion on fire. It was for the best. At least it would end the pain for both of us. Our reunion was a chance encounter I carefully orchestrated. I had been keeping tabs on him ever since he left. When he moved, I pulled some strings to get a job at the local hospital. I didn't know he had been pregnant, let alone that he'd had the child. The boy had a weak constitution and was in and out of the hospital. I always made sure someone was looking after them. But seeing his increasingly gaunt face, I couldn't wait any longer. He brought the child into my clinic. I fought to keep my hands from shaking, forcing myself to look calm as I wrote on the chart. I had imagined our reunion 1,000 times. I expected excitement, joy. I never expected the terror in his eyes to make me hesitate. I stood outside his hospital room for a long time before I finally worked up the courage to go in, using rounds as an excuse to see him. He was so tense. I could only stay for a moment, then sneak back in to watch him after he fell asleep. He slept restlessly, murmuring in his sleep. I sat across from him, just staring at his face. He was so thin his cheekbones jutted out, his complexion sallow. He looked so pale. I looked closer and saw several white hairs, even though he was still so young. My heart felt like it was being squeezed, the pain so intense I could barely breathe. He had been caring for the child for days, and seeing me was the last straw. His body finally gave out. It wasn't until I caught him that I realized how little was left of him under his clothes. He was just a bag of bones, so sharp it hurt to hold him. When he woke up, I tried to ease the tension between us by being formal. But it was like I had hit a nerve. He exploded at me. Blood ran from my forehead into my eyes, and my mind went blank. He unleashed all his anger on me, and I just gave up and brought up the past. He froze. The child woke up, interrupting me. I instinctively covered my wound. This made him even more frantic. He held the child for dear life, terrified I would take him. It wasn't until the boy was about to suffocate that I pulled his hands away and had the nurses give him a sedative. He fought and struggled until the drug took effect and he lost consciousness. The doctor said he had PTSD. Combined with his past trauma, his mental state was extremely unstable. When I saw he was awake, my concern got stuck in my throat, and the words that came out were hurtful instead. He must have been completely disappointed. He was silent for a long time. He told me to let him go. I finally realized that it had all been my fault. I was the cause of all his unhappiness. I agreed. I quit my job at the hospital, made arrangements for Andy's care, and took care of everything so I could leave them for good. After Andy was discharged, I couldn't stop myself. I rented the room across from theirs. Andy's development was slow, which was related to him being alone so much. I paid the landlady to keep my secret, to tell them I was a big brother, and tried my best not to be discovered by Leo. I tried to help Andy become a normal child. It was never about the child. If something was wrong with Andy, Leo would be the one to suffer most. His whole life had been pain. I just wanted his future to be peaceful. Meeting him was an accident. His question left me speechless. I practically fled. I knew that nothing I could do would ever make up for what I had done. Leo was afraid I would take the child, so I gave up my parental rights. He was worried about their finances, so I transferred all my assets to the child. And the will my parents had left for him, which I had forced them to write years ago, I gave him that too. Later, they moved away. It was like I was back where I started years ago, a rat in the gutter, secretly gazing at a light that wasn't mine. Years passed. I watched Leo forget the past. I watched Andy grow up. I watched time leave its marks on Leo's face. I saw my own hunched reflection in the mirror. Andy was now a head taller than Leo. I stood on the street corner, watching an elderly Leo from afar. He had a calm and gentle air about him. He never faced hardship again, nor did he ever fall in love with anyone else. I was grateful Andy didn't look like me, so he wouldn't stir up old memories. He and Andy depended on each other. Andy brought a new family member into their lives. I watched the three of them, a family, raising their glasses on a snowy New Year's Eve. The snow fell, but I didn't feel cold. My body grew heavy. I fell into the snow, and the flakes drifted down on me. In a daze, I saw my stepbrother as a child, reaching out to me. "David, I'm your big brother." I saw him as a teenager, helping me with my homework under the lamplight. A gentle breeze brushed the hair from his forehead. He tilted his head and smiled at me. "Gentle and beautiful. David, let's go home."